All right, what's going on, Macro Perspective peeps? Seamus and Marcos here. We have an amazing guest. Natalie is part of the 3X4 genetics team. She's actually one of the lead representatives there. And we got to connect at the, man, I'm blanking on the IHS, Integrative Healthcare Symposium. And I mean, I feel like I just got to connect with a lot of the genetics folks. And it's just a very, very big passion of mine. And just that weekend alone was just great. But Natalie and I got connected and definitely wanted to get her on the pod to speak next nutrigenomics, but maybe a little bit more about her story and just what she's been seeing in her patient base and these different things and her upbringing and all this. I think it's going to be a great conversation because when we think about health and wellness, there are so many facets of one thing. We say genetics, and we've had multiple guests on here, but one person's a sports performance geneticist, one person is a nutrition version of it, one person's the ethics of it, one person's in the pharmacogenetics. So it's like we can open up that can and we can find so many different worms in there and just explore that. So I think, Natalie, for us, thank you so much for being on the show. First and foremost, I think Marcos and I will have a great conversation here, but yeah, what's been going on in your neck of the woods? What are you excited about? And let's just take the conversation from there.
Yay. Thank you guys so much for having me. It was a pleasure to meet you up in New York City. We had so much fun. But my name's Natalie Gauger. I'm on the sales team for 3X4, and I also have a practice, Natalie Louise Functional Nutrition. I have my master's in clinical nutrition, and I'm also a CNS, which we look at how to support people nutritionally. I do a lot of 3X4 testing in my practice because if you don't understand genetics is the why, and then your biomarkers are the what. If you don't have that combination, it's really hard to understand the root cause of what's going on. And it also helps me save a lot of time going down different rabbit holes that could be. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit about me, and we can dive in.
Perfect. Well, thanks for the elevator pitch intro. I think you're just being very humble with it all. But yeah, tying together. So this is interesting, right? So I feel like the other two people or other couple people we've had on Seamus that were more genetic heavy may not have had the nutritional background. So now we can probably ask more questions related to that, especially because you are like kind of practicing with actual, we'll call them patients, clients, patients, whatever you want to call them, right? We try to use those words not interchangeably to differentiate our patient practice that we help with and then our like personal clients. So, but okay, so you mentioned biomarkers versus genetics, right?
Yeah.
And how they overlay on one another in a sense. Explain more, please, because that caught my attention right away. My ears perked up.
Yeah, definitely, because you can't have one without the other. So, for example, within the 3X test, there's a pathway called oxidative stress. So we're looking at a group of genes, and if that's a really high impact area for that client, I want to understand, like, are they experiencing oxidative stress? Is there, are they just having a normal amount, or is that an area that I need to focus on? So one of those markers is the 8-hydroxyguanosine marker. That's, I think, a urine marker that's often tested that I'll test. And that way I can get a real life picture of what's going on, because of course you have the genetics, and if something's a very high impact, it doesn't even necessarily mean that's something you need to focus on. That's why you need both the biomarkers and the genetics, because you may have, like, let's say, 7 areas in your 3X4 test that are higher impact areas. But when I'm looking at the biomarkers for those higher areas, I may see that 3 or 4 of those are actually, out of line and that I need to focus on. And then that way, once I, select my nutrition, supplement, lifestyle recommendations, as we work together, then I can go back and retest those markers. So it really just helps me to guide my recommendations and make sure that my recommendations are making an impact on that specific person. And what's interesting too is, like, oftentimes there may be a high impact area that I'm seeing that I may not necessarily, like, based upon my intake, like, actually see those signs that I would have tested it, or like if I would have tested a specific marker without doing the genetics. So like for me, my story with genetics is I got my 3X4 test back, and I did a Dutch test just because as new practitioners, you get a really good deal trying it. I wasn't even necessarily having any like hormone issues, anything like that. And I came back and I wasn't ovulating, which is crazy because I'm 30 years old. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I know that my pathway for hormone balance is low. So I didn't have any genetic, variations within that pathway. So I went back to the 3X4, and I'd also chatted with a few others from the clinical team there. And we realized that it was actually my histamine. And I was having histamine overload. I actually did test that in my serum and noticed that my level was high. I've never had allergies. I've never had asthma. I wasn't even necessarily having any symptoms where in my intake I would have said, okay, I need to look into histamine.
Yeah.
And so it gives you that insight that you may never get outside of it.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if I would have thrown that marker into my blood work when I was picking what I wanted for a client if I was seeing myself. So it just gives you that that connection, like, okay, here are the genetics, here are the symptoms, but then here are the selected blood markers that I can pick. And so yeah, that's just my story with it, kind of connecting the two.
Yeah, man, it's so funny. I really feel ever since 3x4 and genetics coming into the work that Marcos and I have been doing, it has honestly opened up doors and explanations for me so much more thoroughly. And yesterday we had a patient, Marcos and I actually work with this patient hand in hand. And this person, just work with this person, but recently they had something similar. But we were talking about this histamine thing, and I saw a post, and it's funny because, when you talk about histamine, it's like, well, what is that, right? It's kind of this thing that's like around immune response and just inflammatory digestion, things like this, but and around allergens. I saw a post the other about histamine, and I'm going through these 3x4 genetics counseling sessions with people, and it finally made sense why you can't live up to the hype. I know that Marcos and I are very inundated in the world where people are like, hey, longevity, you should do cold plunge and you should do sauna and you should do these high stress things. But there are certain populations that actually high temperature ranges aren't necessarily the best for them because they're going to get a high histamine thing. And then it's funny because histamine is also part of the digestion. And one of the weird things is, hey, get away from fermented foods. And for someone that loves like kombucha or other fermented foods like kimchi or sauerkraut, to know this about themselves, could be a really powerful tool, because even though they may not always have to be contraindicated to not have those things, but to be wary and careful, it's good. Because general statements around healthy behaviors, they're just general statements. Once they get very specific, though, especially with the genetic testing, then you can get very tailored and not have to do a lot of that trial and error. And I think that histamine overload, that one, it's been coming up a lot in my work. It's an interesting one for sure.
Question though, so Natalie, with like histamines in general, can we explain to the listener what that is exactly? Because I know we know what an antihistamine is, but like, will that be like a Flonase, right? Like, it kind of like helps with that, or any of those like kind of nasal things that kind of help combat the reaction. But like, what is like in layman's terms, what is a histamine?
Yeah, so histamine is actually something that we can create, our bodies can create, but it's also something that we can take in as well through food. And so histamines, our body, we create these enzymes to break down the histamine that we create and eat. And histamine is something that triggers the immune system. So it can trigger something called a mast cell. And so what we want to do is we really, for these people that have variations within the histamine pathway and that could potentially lead to histamine overload, is reduce the amount of histamine, whether by blocking histamine in the cells by taking something like quercetin, which we do need to look at other parts of the genetics to make sure that, they're a candidate for quercetin. But it really helps to work on diet, work on supplement, work on, lifestyle recommendations to then reduce that histamine overload. Ultimately, what we're trying to do for these people is just to reduce that amount of histamine to then reduce the inflammatory response that can come with it.
I actually remember taking quercetin as a recommendation from my late friend Travis. And it was during, like, I used to get terrible seasonal allergies, congestion, practically like I had a sinus infection type of deal. And he's like, all right, buddy. He always called me buddy. All right, buddy, you're going to do this. You're going to wake up, you're going to do a shot of apple cider vinegar, you're going to throw cayenne in there, and you're going to take quercetin. I swear to God, it was like God's elixir, because I was like, I can breathe, I'm alive. Running a mile. So, but you're now saying that with some of the genetic testing, you'd actually be able to see potential other pathways that might be contraindicated to utilizing that particular thing.
Yeah. So anybody that has a slow COMT, they would want to avoid quercetin, because then it'll slow their COMT even more, which is going to affect their methylation pathway. And so just looking at that SNP and a few others too would be helpful to find out if that person, if you would want to recommend, because it can make some people super anxious. If you already have a slow compt and then you're giving quercetin, it can slow it down some more and cause some anxiety for those people.
Or not to be the dumbest one in the room, comp.
Oh, comp, yeah. I actually, this is so bad. It's I think it's comethyltransferase, I believe is comped. Yeah, it's the enzyme that's involved in methylation. So taking on and off a methyl group, it can control gene expression. A lot of the B vitamins are the cofactors for the methylation pathway. And so, yeah, methylation, it can be involved in brain health. It can be involved in turning cells on and off. And it's a really important cellular pathway, and it's one of the ones on the 3x4 test too.
This is why I like the genetics, Marcos, because like there's so many like things that you're like, man, you go down pathways and bodily processes, and it's like a whole, like, you just need a whole dictionary to just understand what's going on half the time.
Yeah.
And I think here, like, again, like I didn't know compt, but I'm gonna basically try to make it so that we're giving everybody like the 5th grade version of this. You know what I mean? Like I know that we can probably take it a little higher level, but I want everybody that's listening to hopefully have an understanding and kind of leave with like, why should I care about methylation and histamines, and how can I dictate things in a positive manner without going and getting this test? Because that's always like my biggest concern. So you've basically saying I won't work with a client unless they're doing these gene things, right? Like that's kind of part of what you're doing. Like that's a prerequisite for you. Whereas for me, I'm not to that stage because I'm not confident enough to get the readout and then also give the advice and say yes and no to these things. I would love to in the future, and I think maybe if we get enough people on the podcast, Seamus, I'll feel good enough to be like, hey, this is included, and just buy it.
We did a whole genetics master's program by just having a guest every day, and that was our lecture series. It's like we made a university out of it.
Well, yeah, and I have one of my coach told me, she's like, you used a word that was like really, it seemed foreign to me, and she said osteoporosis, I said osteopenia. You know what I mean? And obviously, she kind of put context together, but she was like, I didn't know that was you saying the beginning stages of full-blown osteoporosis, right? So it got me thinking about just like our other conversations with the genetic specialists, like, oh, wow, like there's a lot of stuff that like we gloss over because we're just in it all the time. But then how to like then translate that to more people, like I think that's where we can kind of extract value. So Natalie, when it comes to like the report, obviously the report, we actually have an episode that will have been released by this time that kind of dove into that, and it was with Daniel, and he was talking about, again, just the breakdown of like the pathways that are like most concerning to help people, and from the fitness perspective and injury and risk reduction, and then how the supplementation from the report can be, really a nice bread and butter piece. He also described that how the diagrams inside of the actual report kind of change a little bit as it is tailored to you in terms of like how you're, I think it was the fat cells, like the size of the fat cells and other stuff there, which I was like, I didn't know that, like cool, like good nugget to like also tell patients when we're getting this report, like, hey, this is actually like using that report and changing the size to help give a better visual representation of stuff. But I was like, sick, like that's like a good value add for, like I'm stealing that, writing it down, right? So we have like the big 3 pathways that typically people should be most worried about when it comes to this specific report with 3x4, right? But in terms of kind of bridging that to like you with your personal clients and coaching, how do you coach from that? How do you distill that information into something very digestible? Like, I'm just going to assume, like, again, like the layperson, someone that's like, I'm interested in this, but I know this much. I know 0.
Yeah, I completely understand where you're coming. It's overwhelming. Like, if you're just looking at everything, because you get so much information. But how I break it down for my clients is I take it. So whatever their symptoms and their history is, what their goals are, I only want to give them maybe 3 things to start. And then depending on their readiness, I may only give 1 or 2. So like for tomorrow, I have a client who's been, struggling with hormonal balance, and we've been working together for 6 months, and she didn't necessarily want to do a 3x4 test at first. And I got her results back. I'm like, oh, wow, we only need to focus on one thing. And it's not what I've been focusing on for the past 6 months. I've wasted 6 months and supplement money and time. And so really just focusing on those recommendations. So like jumping back to the methylation, like for recommendations on like B complex or just B vitamin rich foods, making sure that you're taking like a methylcobalamin versus some of the other forms to make sure that you're utilizing it and absorbing it, especially for people if their area that they need to focus on is methylation. That's actually an already activated B vitamin versus something that you have to activate where if you're having those methylation problems, you're not going to activate it as well and use it as much. So, focusing on making sure you have those activated forms of the vitamin like methylcobalamin, like we just talked about, cruciferous vegetables, leafy greens, legumes, meats, those are all foods that are higher in, the B vitamins. And then also just folate's really important for methylation too, which is, spinach, leafy greens. That's going to be really important as well.
Yeah.
And it's really important to eat the nutrient dense foods, but some people really need to supplement certain things. And so that's also what the 3x4 test helps me to find out is where I need to supplement people and then where they can just support themselves through those foods. Because as we all know, like supplements are expensive and I don't want to give, 6 different things to somebody. I want to focus on, okay, what is really important for this person? What are they eating? And what pathways need to be supported and what nutrition can I give them for that?
Yeah, I love that. I think having the test is important. I think like it's crazy because it's true. I think, Marcos and I don't necessarily always have to start something to get results with people, like off an assessment, but it's like, I'm just getting more and more, feedback that like snaps. Maybe I do this test initially so that we have a great answer from the get-go and then we iterate from that. And I feel more confident leaning into that more because it's true. Like I think making that mistake, I've done that mistake for so long where I'm like recommending things for 6 months to a year with somebody and like, yeah, they may be making progress, especially with like fat loss is mostly like what we coach or like transformational stuff or maybe just habits. Maybe there was these other things that we just didn't even know underneath the hood, right? That we're coaching and we're like, we were totally going the opposite way. And, yeah, you're right. Like I made people buy supplements or buy certain things and try different things without even having an actual roadmap or an actual starting point. I think it's important to know like, okay, and maybe start really incorporating some of these tests and start thinking about it because it's that does give you a great starting point and then from there you could really play. I know that part of your coaching and part of that nutrition for you, Natalie, is you come up across like rough cases and things like this. I think even before we get on the camera, you were talking about some interesting case things and that you've been seeing a lot of and heard anecdotally and just talking with your peers. It might be really good to explore that today in the call because it might be just something sinister out there that people aren't understanding maybe with their genetics and nutrition. And yeah, would you mind just delving into that for us?
Yeah, for sure. I had brought up low stomach acid. Have either of you two seen low stomach acid a lot as well?
It's more common now, I find. And I think and this is funny, again, going back to Travis, he was always telling me, again, buddy, high and low stomach acid have very similar symptomology, right? And so a lot of people will just throw a PPI at it, proton pump inhibitor, okay, for everybody that's wondering, right? And so that's going to basically be any of those drugs that kind of suppress quote unquote GERD or acid reflux, right? And I was like, okay, when I started, I was like your age, right? I was like 24, I was 21 really at the time. And I was like, yeah, I'll get to the specialty people when I get older. You know what I mean? Like, give me some tenure, just like showing people how to lose fat first. Yeah. And here we are now having this thing, like, and people are like, well, what do you think? And I was like, well, is it high or low? That's my first question. And they're like, well, what do you mean? He always told me, he's like, give it a try with like a baking soda tolerance test, right? To kind of get some sort of feedback initially. It doesn't cost very much, right? And most people have baking soda at home. So I'll give people that as like kind of something as like give me confirmation as to, again, high or low, right? Maybe you have better protocols. That's like the main one comes to mind to me. The other one he had was like supplementing with hydrochloric acid and betaine, right? And then slowly titrating up the hydrochloric acid to a point where you kind of feel that like warm burning sensation in the stomach to kind of aid digestion along. And again, he was normally doing it with a lot of women back in the day when I was first getting started, but he had been coaching for nutrition for over 10 years at that point. So again, he's like, I already mastered all the basic shit, guys. Like, let me get to the fucking difficult people.
Yeah. No, I do the baking soda test too. Sometimes you just can't, like, sometimes the simplest things are the best things that you can do.
Now, do you
So-
mind breaking down the baking soda test for the audience if someone might be dealing with this and like they didn't know it, or they just want to give it a try?
Yeah. So the baking soda test, so your stomach is acidic, and then what you're taking in the baking soda is basic. So when they mix together, you're supposed to produce a burp within 5 minutes, which sounds gross, but it's about like 3 to 4 ounces of water, teaspoon of baking soda, drink it first thing in the morning. If you burp, that means that you have adequate stomach acid.
Within
But
5 minutes?
What do you say?
If you burp within 5 minutes, you have adequate stomach acid?
Yep. And then if you don't burp, then that means that you may have low stomach acid. And a lot of times my clients aren't even burping at all after drinking it. They'll be like, "Oh, it's been an hour and I've got nothing."
Dang.
And so, yeah, it's crazy. And so I've probably seen maybe, I would say like 50% of my clients have had low stomach acid when I've done the test. And some of the symptoms that I've seen are like food and stool, not just corn, but anything leafy, anything like that. They're just not digesting their food. I'm also seeing, burping after meals. That's a really big sign of lower stomach acid, even burping with water. And then also like any bloating after meals, any reflux or heartburn, just like Marcos was saying, because a lot of times those symptoms are the same with the heartburn and GERD. We don't know if it's necessarily high or low. And then anybody that's just having trouble, like I've heard it like sometimes with people like, oh, well, I've gone vegetarian because my stomach can't take steak, or I'm having trouble like with chicken, or just digesting your proteins, because your digestive enzymes in your stomach are really where you're digesting your protein. And so if somebody's having trouble with that, it's a really big sign for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Seamus, give me 2 seconds. So it's funny, like I like 2 products for this particular case, especially if it's like, again, it's a safe bet. And if they kind of mention that in my questionnaire and intake of like difficulty digesting food or kind of bloated after meals or whatever, in the initial intake call, I'll usually say, hey, you might benefit from Enzymes from Bioptimizers or their hydrochloric acid breakthrough, right? So 2 things that help with like digestion enhancement. And for one of my clients who I haven't worked with her in a while, but I mean, she looks great. She's like figured out kind of the right stuff. She doesn't probably need me anymore. Sad day. But one capsule of Enzymes, like dinner, made a world of a difference, to the point where she thought she was like practically celiac, where now she can include some of those foods that were causing, again, kind of maybe a little bit of an autoimmune response to it. Those type of takeaways as a coach, I feel like are incredibly valuable, because I'm always looking for minimum effective dose, and those 2 products have really done a great job of helping provide just, again, some symptom relief, but also they're like, again, like you just said, it's like, oh, like I'm processing protein, like their composition changes, even though weight may not change right away. Like you just said, it's like it all kind of starts in the gut. So sorry, Seamus, I know you had something in this put in there, but I just wanted to let people know, like that's something I've been doing a lot more of lately.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's funny because I always get reminded, because I'm on the low end of the acid, so like I'm like, oh, that reminds me, I gotta go get my Enzymes, or I gotta put some apple cider vinegar back into my diet, because I do get those symptoms sometimes of like, oh, that's not fully digested, or like, what's going on this week, where I'm like, I totally forgot my digestive stuff, just because I'm busy and stuff. But it's like, it is a massive difference. I'm not getting these major symptoms where a bloat is like making me real, or like I'm very like, I'm having a hard day. Like I don't get that, but definitely just in different, like, mostly in stool and stuff like that. So I think about these things. I'm like, when we think about health, that's a great indicator. But I also just think like, now, like for me, like when it comes to like healthcare, someone goes to the urgent care or doctor, like, do they even go through a protocol like that? Or do they have to go through someone like you to have to like figure it out? Like, oh, it's just a 5-minute test. And if we don't know, or if you have low or high and you have adequate with this test, all we probably need to do is just get on some Enzymes and some apple cider vinegar. But like, they go through all this stuff and now they're going through circles. So like, do you work with people that like have this low acid stomach, went through the whole doctor route, but never just had it figured out, and now they're maybe misdiagnosed with something, or like they're taking all these medications or something like that?
Yeah, I've seen that so much. I've seen people that have done everything. They've done colonoscopy, endoscopies. They've gone, and they're not helping because they're just like, oh, well, you have IBS and, let's take some fiber. But fiber might not help that population very much. It might actually make things worse. So it's almost like putting Band-Aids on what they're going through, and they've gone to so many doctors. It just makes me sad. I feel like, honestly, when I'm sure that both of you kind of feel the same way. And then going back to what Marcos was saying about the gut being really connected with, just overall health and weight loss. Like I've seen that too, where when you can optimize the gut in addition to other things, it can also help to promote that weight loss. Because if your gut isn't healthy, it's harder for you to focus on anything else for your body. So it's been super helpful for that population of my clients too.
Yeah, it's funny how even like the most bro science people these days, people who get like optimized results, like I kind of use the analogy of like at the highest level of math, eventually you have this intersection with philosophy. And it's like at the highest level of understanding like bodybuilding, there's this integrative health kind of thing that's going, like the spheres merge where it's like, yeah, you got to figure out how to digest stuff better. Right. And so a lot of things a couple years back, as we were getting kind of mentored by Jason Theobald from Scooby Prep. I know it's like a funny name for a prep company, but dude is like incredibly brilliant. He has new ethics formulations and was just talking about, again, it's like my functional medicine doctors, they're right here. And here's this guy from bodybuilding literally merging, like, you're going to start your protocol, no matter who the hell you are when you're working with me, with a detox, like a cleanse, a liver detoxification. And I'm like, now I'm like scratching my head. I'm like, maybe I should be starting every client off with some like detoxing protocol where they're giving their gut a break for a little bit. They're getting in some essential nutrients and they're working on phase 1 and phase 2 liver detox, right? Because maybe they've just been eating poorly for a while or there's some other unknown issues, right? And then I think it's because there's this slow kind of almost like reintroduction phase, even though there wasn't an elimination diet, where people are like, oh my God, like that thing is like really bothering me. They're paying more attention to how like the gut dysbiosis is actually behaving in them. And I'm actually in the process of doing it with one of my other clients right now, where I'm like, again, it's like, to me, I boil it down to cost. Like they just paid for coaching, you know what I mean? To then like pay for the next thing. And I probably should get that out of like my thought process, because they're paying me as the professional to steer them down the right path. So if they had to pay another $100 or $200 for the adequate supplementation to get them going, then we're doing them a disservice to not do it. Just like before with you, if that person would have done it 6 months earlier, you're like, oh crap, I got to focus on this thing and hit it harder sooner, and, to be able to just kind of be dead set on like, this is how I operate, like this is going to get you the best result, best way I know how. I'm trying to be a little more dead set on that too. But bridging into like kind of what you're saying here. Okay. So we get test done, low stomach acid. What's the protocol? What does someone do? What do you do as a practitioner to help them kind of get to the next step?
Yeah, so it depends how severe it is. So sometimes I'll just do bitters with people before they eat, or like apple cider vinegar. But if somebody's like really exhibiting like all of the symptoms, I'll do, like you were saying, like the HCl betaine pills. And so I'll start with one with every meal. And then if they can tolerate it, I'll move them up to 2. Actually, I had somebody on 4 before.
Yeah.
It was bad. But you can go up and dose to see if they get that warm feeling in their stomach. And when they do, I just go back 1 pill. And then I usually stay on it for, a month to 3 or 4 months, depending on how severe it is. And then once that burning starts coming back over those months, I'll start to move down the dose until we don't use it anymore. And so basically what it's doing is it's reteaching your stomach cells to reproduce the acid that it wasn't creating anymore.
So even with an exogenous source, though, it would not create like a dependency on it, you find?
Yeah, I'm not finding that there's as much of a dependency, because it's a reteaching tool almost for the stomach cells. It's not going to be like as strong, but just making sure, like I teach my clients, like making sure that they're eating like arugula, some of these like stomach acid triggering foods before their meals to like keep that acid up. And oftentimes people that have low stomach acid, it's because of something. So it could be, okay, well, they've been on Motrin for a while, or they've been taking PPIs. And so it's just retraining those stomach cells and their history and finding out kind of why that's happening. and H. pylori as well. But yeah, there's a lot of different
No,
things, and then just figuring it out.
no, it's so funny. I was kind of reminded from another performance health coach because we were going down this lane, and it was a few years ago. But yeah, like the betaine, super powerful for the stomach. But he, as a coach, struggled, and he had to reintroduce that and reteach his body like the ox bile,
Oh
like
yeah.
super
Yeah.
powerful for like fats, because he like was like, yeah, like for some reason I'll eat, but then the fat bothers me. Brought in some ox bile, and then like protein,
Mhm.
he'll do like the proteases and the pepsin, and I like the masszymes, but I also like the digeszymes from Designs for Health for that, and like because it has that
Mhm.
like that blend, and it
Mhm.
has all that, and it was funny because he knew about himself that he's like, yeah, I just stopped producing these things, and he was an interesting case. I think he just knew himself very well, where he was saying, I actually tried to train myself up, but my body just doesn't produce it. So he's kind of like dependent on it for his life. I think he's just was at an age that like he's just super dependent on it, where carbs, fats, and proteins, a combination of all that and bigger meals for him was like, all right, a little ACV, a little digestive enzymes while I eat, and that's it. That's just the protocol for him.
Yeah, that's the ox bile part too. The
Mhm.
gallbladder. I feel like I don't know what it is, but a lot of people's gallbladders just seem to be like not functioning
Shot.
properly anymore.
Yep.
I don't even know why, but that's like again my sneaking suspicion is there's like something going on. Maybe it's the red dye 40. I don't know. uh,
Get some methylene blue, Marcos. Go from
Yeah.
red to blue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but I mean, like asking those questions as like the health coach is like, all right, cool. Like, do you have like fatty stools? Like, what does that even mean? It's like, does it look oily? Is there just things that like digesting fat, or also asking the question like, did you get your gallbladder removed? Which was going back to my original story with the lady I've helped, right? That was the main reason why I got her the mastocymes was because of the lipase, because she had her gallbladder removed. It just so also happened to benefit the protein digestion because that had been upticked as well. And also, then it also helped her carb digestion, and she's like, my God, this thing is like a godsend. I was like, what can I say? I just listen to other people that are more educated than me and try to distill that information to other people. But it's really interesting because like the gut, low stomach acid, and I think the other thing that gained was like really popular when I was like breaking into coaching was like quote unquote leaky gut, right? Or where, as the junctions start to kind of like separate due to a multitude of reasons. Again, more commonly with females dealing with like the leaky gut or gut intestine permeability, right? And that was interesting because I guess women just tend to probably have a harder time clearing cortisol, right? And as a result, it was probably leading to more issues. I think it also, from some other courses I've taken, it talked about just the shape because of the uterus changes how the gut looks, right? So
Mhm.
women tend to deal with more motility issues and stomach issues than men purely because they're meant to rear children, which I was like, man, that's actually super fascinating. And also makes a ton of sense because most dudes, like, except for the one guy I had that had like giardia, like, and some other like, things that were pathogen related, like it's generally women. Seamus, do you feel like you've had any dudes that have had like a ton of stomach issues?
Dude, it's interesting. Not really, man. I really think most it's mostly women, and like
Mhm.
that. I think that honestly comes from like those two things, like managing cortisol and managing stress, and then just again time of month and like uterus like kind of issues. Like even the anatomy is just always so different. And I think like that was like the easiest thing I could do with guys is like just get some digestive enzymes in there, and they're like, all right, they're good. I don't see a lot of men. It's weird. Like I don't see a lot of men with a lot of autoimmune kind of stuff. I don't see a lot of men with different things. I mean, it might be I'm just a small population, but there might be obviously a ton of them. But like it just seems more prevalent with women, and then it's more prevalent. I felt like I'm just seeing this a lot more in my work too. Is around their perimenopause. It's just like all these things get exacerbated, and then the diagnostics show that. And then if you've been a woman too, I don't know if you've seen this, Natalie, but like if you've been a woman too, I don't know why I've been seeing this a lot more. A lot more women younger are having those same like symptoms around perimenopause, but they're like 25 to 30, and it's like very odd, and I just don't know why that is. And we'll go through down a history list of like what happened with your hormones. Were you on birth control or something, or did you take medications? And usually is something to that of record. But yeah, I just feel like it always is woman, Marcus, that like I'm always like, guys, oh, you're trying to lose fat, hit your calories. Woman, we need to do the 3x4 on you real quick so I can give you the right pathways to support you.
Yeah, it's kind of uncanny. I do kind of feel for women in that regard, where it does tend to be a tougher nut to crack in a sense. But again, I think that if you just give it patience and you truly kind of like listen and do try to get down to not just treating symptomology, but trying to get to the root cause, right? And I think that's again the idea behind anything like functional based. I think it's nice to be around clinicians that are looking at that versus just treating, like, from a medicine standpoint, which might have been a little more traditional. So yeah, I mean, actually yesterday I got educated on like why birth control could be a useful tool for PCOS, and I was like, wouldn't that like not make sense? He's like, actually no, because if you use that to kind of upregulate some of the hormones that do get downregulated with androgen dominance, it kind of balances it out, so it can actually help that. And I was like, no shit. Well, thank you for that education lesson. That's why you're the MD and I'm just the board certified health coach.
But it's really, yeah, it's, you also with birth control, you really have to think about nutrient deficiencies that for those women, because if you're not thinking about that, that's where you can get a lot of fatigue because it depletes all of the B vitamins. So then that will also affect other different pathways, and it may, it's interesting because, yeah, it's just interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's so many ways to kind of triage it and move through it, but I think that's kind of the fascinating part about where the technology is now taking us, right? To be able to look at the genes, and I mean, how much AI stuff is going on in the background with 3x4? Is there a lot kind of aggregating through this and being able to truly build an even more personalized supplement plan? Do you have any sense of that? Are you allowed to share?
I don't know if I'm allowed to share.
Damn it, okay.
But I'll keep you all updated. There's a few things in the
Okay, cool. Well,
things that are being explored.
Okay.
We're definitely going to get in the pipeline with our workflows at Synergenics anyways, and we'll probably get trained up on it. True. Anyways, Marcos.
I know. Yeah, because I feel like I've taken and or suggest a lot of things that tend to be, again, very, very practical, safe, and have a ton of research backing it and utility. But to be like, you can save a couple extra bucks. Like you don't need, this thing or that thing. Like I think people would appreciate that because, I mean, at the end of the day, like having a fixed cost on supplements, like if you think about it being something there in perpetuity, shit, like it adds up over the course of years of doing that. Like I can only imagine how much money I've spent on freaking magnesium.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I was thinking that the other day. I don't want to know how much I've spent on supplements.
Right. And before I used to feel like,
let's break it down. I want to break it down for a second, actually. I think about this constantly because Marcos and I are like inundated with this all the time. I'm like, truly, from a deficiency standpoint, because like Marcos and I get to look at our labs. I do look at my 3x4 genetics. I don't think supplement is the right word anymore. I know it sounds so weird because supplement, the argument always has been, right, Marcos, like supplement is to supplement what's missing.
Are you going to throw the word nutraceuticals in there instead? Like,
yeah.
maybe it's nutraceuticals. Yes, yeah. Gosh, that's smart, Marcos. But I feel that like after doing the testing, right, and after understanding my labs and being consistent, I'm like, I can't get this in my food. Like I can't get these specific things in my food. I can't get certain herbs and certain things that I need specifically in my food at the dosing that I need to get them at. I just don't think it's a supplement. So I feel like for me, from a deficiency standpoint, from a needs analysis, I just go like, that's not a supplement for me because I can't get that through my food. Like no matter how much I eat, and I've thrown it up in Chronometer, and I'm like, give me the perfect diet. And I'm like, there's still a lot of stuff missing. Like, what do you think about that, Natalie? Like, I feel like that's why I feel like that 3x4 helps a lot because it's like, even though you may be getting it from your diet, like, for example, choline, folate, methyl groups, like, you may still be compromised no matter what. And then your labs say it too. So it's like, actually, yeah, unfortunately, you do have to buy the extra stuff if you want to be out of this range.
Yeah. No, I think that it helps to pinpoint what you need to supplement with, but also like if you want to cut down on supplements, also doing like a micronutrient panel or something to find out what your levels are. Because like, let's say for selenium is something that you need to take or need to support yourself oxidative stress wise, but your selenium levels are adequate in your serum, as well as you're eating oysters and some other selenium rich foods that may not, be a supplement that you need to do. So that's why I think that doing testing is important alongside 3x4, because now you know where to look, but then you can see, okay, well, is this an area I need to focus on? And I think that some things are too, like just throwing it out there, like SPMs, like you can't really like eat SPMs. You definitely need to like supplement with them. And so I think that
Can you
that's
break down
something.
SPMs real quick? Sorry.
Yeah. So they're basically like the building blocks for like little, like to modulate the immune system. So they can be used like if you roll your ankle or something, you can take SPM. So it helps to kind of control the inflammation. And it's not necessarily
Which
like
product would be an SPM?
there's a Metagenics product.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll send you it after. I forget the name of it, but that has the best dose
Hmm.
for the SPMs. And so it's really, really, really good for inflammation. You can take it in conjunction with, omega-3s or just omega-3 rich foods, but it's really great for people with inflammation and just controlling, inflammatory disease as well. I usually do
Yeah.
SPMs with people.
I just Googled it. Specialized pro-resolving mediators. Is that
Yes,
that's oh yes, that's so yeah, these are I was
that
doing
is
a
it.
little study on this. I was doing a little study on this, and yeah, like what you're saying is that it's helpful for it's a lipid mediator, meaning a fat mediator, to help with toxins in your fat, and it helps with making sure what you're saying is like anything inflammatory, it helps bring this down, is what you're saying.
Fascinating. The more you know, man. That's like, I feel
I'm gonna
like,
get a master's in this stuff, Mario.
I mean, I'm just over here with my measly bachelor's of science in mathematics. So, like that's
Yeah.
so. Okay, the SPMs. That's okay. So to be able to allow for kind of like acute inflammation, right? You're saying it does a good job with acute inflammation. All right. Does it have any other utility outside of that, or would you use it more along those lines?
You can use it along those lines, like at a higher dose, but you can also do like a maintenance dose for chronic inflammation as well. Like I take SPMs every day just because I'm just more inflamed. Because I have one of my pathways that I need to focus on is inflammation as well as my histamine overload. So I take my SPMs to help to just support inflammation daily. And I genuinely feel different when there's days that go by and I don't take it. So that's just something that, I can't necessarily get through food that I know supports me because I can feel the difference. And so just like what Seamus was saying, it's just there's certain things that you can't get through food that you need to get a nutraceutical for and take them there instead of through food or anything like that.
All right, so no guessing. Go get your genetics and get your labs. You only need to do the genetics once, and I think the labs is what makes it more tailored. I think this is why I was having a conversation with our VP yesterday. It's like the depth of having a tailored program such as Synergenics or any program that looks at your labs is, and if we're going to be cost effective, right? It's like, yeah, you do pay up front for a genetic test. A genetic test is that test is probably like the most affordable and the most. I love that test. I've done a bunch, and I think it's the most competitively advantageous one. I think that's why we partner with them. But labs, when you be consistent with it, you can actually tailor your labs to you. So, like for example, like you said, you do your micronutrient profile, you do all this stuff. Well, I've been taking this multi, and I've worked with tons of clients and patients taking a bunch of stuff. I've like literally seen them pull it out of a drawer and pantry. I'm like, why are you taking that stuff? Well, I listened to this podcast. Well, I saw it on the thing. My wife told me to do it, and all this. And first off, it might be contraindicated. They don't need to do it. They're overdoing it, right? And I think having the labs helps because you know where you're at, and then the genetics to anchor on top of that. But then the repeat. I think the repeat is important because then you can go, oh, I don't need this anymore. Or we could phase this one out a little bit. And I think there's certain ingredients that you should be phasing out and rotating in sometimes just to make sure that whether it be like liver enzymes or those specific markers you're looking for, you're not coming out of ranges, right?
Yeah, and like vitamin D during the winter is really important, especially if somebody has variations in their vitamin D receptors or activating vitamin D, because those are people that really need to be supplementing and monitoring, year round, but especially in the winter, because vitamin D is important in so many things. And another thing people don't realize about vitamin D is it's a fat soluble vitamin. So you have to take your vitamin D supplement with fat. And if you're not, then you're not absorbing it. You need to make sure that you're doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think. You had one other thing you mentioned before we hit record. It was the low stomach acid. It was tying the two things together. I can't remember the third one for the life of me.
The nutrition focused physical exam.
Yes.
Ooh.
Okay. I'll let you take
That's big.
that a little bit. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so as a CNS, we're trained in physical signs of potential nutrient deficiency or just insufficiency. And so one of them is just bumps on the back of your arms. So if I see somebody with those, I may think like low B12, like, okay, and then I'll look for other signs that they may need B12. I'll also look low stomach acid because, of course, you need your intrinsic factor, which is made in your stomach. And so if you have low stomach acid, you're not absorbing your B12. So that's something that I think about, as well as like on your nails. If somebody has brittle nails, it may be like protein deficiency, but if they have lines on their nails and like little white dots, it's zinc deficiency. And so we're trained in just these little tidbits of if we can look at somebody's eyes, their skin, their hair, we can kind of make notes as what the connection between potential insufficiencies and how they're presenting themselves. And another one I really like tying back into some of the gut stuff we were talking about is it sounds really weird, but we ask everybody to stick out their tongue so we could see their tongue. We're looking for potential ridges on the outside of their tongue, which can be associated with like some of the B's. And then we're also looking to see if there's a white coating because that's a sign of dysbiosis.
That is so funny. Desiree does this all the time. I know. It's funny because Desiree does physicals, and it's funny because she's clinical dietitian, but it's like actually in the state of California, it's crazy how part of supporting the physician, the dietitian is actually pretty strong too in terms of like, no, I've done the physical on these parameters, and we're looking at their labs like this is going to be the protocol for their eating, and like they put their foot down, and it's like I think being confident in yourself and knowing these skills. I remember when she was going through her clinical training, she had this pamphlet, this little book of the different symptoms. She's like, look at the tongue, look at the thing, and I was like, that is so cool. That is so fascinating.
It is so fascinating, and it really helps to pinpoint stuff, and also helps to make the connection with the client too. Just saying like, hey, here are your labs, and you're also exhibiting like these physical symptoms, and then they can watch instead of running a lab again. They can be like, oh well, the dots on my nails have started to go away, or my acne's cleared up, because acne may be a sign of like hormonal imbalance or food sensitivity, but it could also be like selenium, zinc, omega-3 need. And so just really, really cool, the different connections between the physical and then the depletions that we may have.
Yeah. The body is truly a unique organism. And I feel like, again, externally, it's cool that can be like the first barrier of like, these might be things that you want to go get tested. Then you get those things tested maybe in serum. And then you can, again, I mean, the cost of like a pretty comprehensive panel versus doing the genomics test or the genetic test, right, it's actually probably a little bit more to do a serum test that would be as comprehensive as ours, right, Seamus? I feel like a full complete one, life extensions, is about $575, right, like retail, and then they usually have like discounts, so we'll just call it $500. But then to actually get like something that again isn't really changing, that can kind of be updated as there's more insight being shared in that field, which is pretty cool. What is the cost again for the 3x4?
It's $299. And you have it forever. And you never swab again, and you get free updates for life. So you just reach out to our team. We update about once a year. Right. And then you'll get those additional SNPs.
So yeah, I mean, there you go. Something that gets updated, kind of goes with you for a long time is, I think, super valuable. And again, with that one kind of blood work timestamp snapshot, again, there's a lot of things that could be going on where a lot of these things are looking at more of like the 90 days, the 90-day averages of things, and or what the acute stress level has looked like maybe for the last week or two. I mean, the space has definitely evolved a lot in 6 years of me being in more of the clinical space. So I can only imagine what year 10 will look like. But Seamus, is there anything else? I mean, I feel like the thought of like, tying it all together from the physical to these tests and how people can maybe look at those things, or, like you just said, to kind of do that nutritional screening, right? Or those like kind of appearance things that maybe, get people that are listening to kind of start looking at some things that may be a little off, right?
Yeah. I think one last thing I think we want to plug in here with 3x4 is, we talked from food, for the listener, like if you're dealing with some food stuff, stomach stuff, then you're talking about symptomology stuff. And if you're just a normal listener, it's just like, hey, I'm a wellness enthusiast and I got $300. I can do this test. Is like, I think the biggest thing is, what does 3x4 look like in terms of like finding a practitioner? Like you could order the test, but like having a practitioner go through that with you, and then like how much that differs from just like, hey, let me take this to my normal doctor. Because I've heard like people take this to a normal doctor and they're like, oh well, I'm not trained in this, and they kind of just like buggy out. So I think having someone trained in this is kind of the important thing, is what we're trying to get to.
Yeah, definitely. And we have 3x4 has a practitioner locator. So you can just type in your zip code and it'll find somebody in your area. There's also a lot of telehealth practitioners that are certified in 3x4. And so that's really the best way, because when you look at the report as a client without a practitioner's guidance, you may be focusing on things. Yes, they'll support you, but depending on what's going on with your symptoms and your history right now, they might not be as applicable to you at that moment. For example, like if you're having, gut stuff and hormone imbalance, as well as, fatigue, and then bone health is one of your top 3 with the recommendations for nutrition, stuff like that. Yes, that's going to support you, but that's not your goal right now. And so finding a practitioner that can combine your symptoms, your history, as well as the genetics to find out what pathways are going to be most important for you at that moment. And then also just making sure that you're getting quality supplementation and the best nutrition recommendations for you. I definitely suggest going to see a practitioner and just honestly just going through the 3x4 test with a practitioner, because then you can ask your questions, because there's so much in there, whether it's, within weight loss or, or diet or, the different cellular pathways, glucose, insulin, collagen and joints. Not everybody has the connection with genetics, and all of these practitioners have been fully trained. So it's just amazing what they know and how they can apply it to your specific case. And so that way you can get the most personalized recommendations.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I think for the listener here, think about this offer. I think it's great, and we have our whole genetic series, and everyone that's in there utilizes it in a separate way. So you can have a practitioner, you can talk to them, and I think it's funny because genetics is this thing, and I think X4 Genetics has this lifestyle genetics component, and they've really done a great job of not just giving you your information about you and updating it every year. I know I've updated mine a few times, but it's about the counseling of it, being able to speak with someone and give you context on where you're at with your health now, as opposed to, trying to give you even though it's a personalized plan, just a cookie cutter, hey, just do this. No, they're going to really work with you. And I think that's an important thing. And when you stack that with like a program like a Synergenics, for example, now you're really comprehensive. You're super comprehensive. You get a coach, you're going through it. But Natalie, thanks so much. I think it's an hour is here, but anywhere else they can find you, anything else you're excited for, just put it down. So we'll put it in the notes for you.
Yay. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys having me on the podcast. I'll send you guys my website and then a 3x4 link too, so that if anybody's interested in buying a test, they can get.
Perfect. Yeah. We'll have Natalie's Instagram linked down there below. And additionally, just thank you and everybody on your team that has come on and graced us with, an hour of deeper dives and insights and utilization of one tool, in the practitioner toolbox to help guide so many different people in different pathways, which I think is amazing. So there's so much value from this genetic test, from, again, that simple readout that's very much, again, you don't need the practitioner, but they can help dive a little deeper with you. And then you have kind of the sports utility that we had with our previous episode, and how those types of things can obviously help with recovery and the sports science behind it. And then and how it transitions over to people, with supplementation recommendations being very personalized and getting to the deeper root cause far quicker than, just making educated guesses and kind of seeing. So, guys, go give Natalie a follow over on Instagram or whatever other platforms that she is trying to promote. Insert plug here. Where else do you like people finding you?
Yeah, you can also find me on LinkedIn too.
Okay, I thought so. That one did hit higher on the SEO, so I should have assumed.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's probably more prevalent on a LinkedIn. We'll have that linked out as well. Yeah, until next time, guys. Our series here is going to continue. We're genuinely fascinated about it, and we're going to have a lot more things related to genetics. We should be having a a whole bunch of different guests coming on as we have a lot of people in the docket going into the rest of 2025. So we're super stoked about that. So until next time, Macropod peeps, Marcos, Seamus, and today Natalie, our esteemed guest, out.